whose whose focus is to support youth in conflict with the law, which is essentially those who've been criminalized or been on the path to criminalization. And we do that through three ways: supporting existing led community initiatives through grant making. We practice trust-based philanthropy. We mobilize change in the philanthropic community, and we also do a lot of public policy support behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Danielle, can we have you introduce yourself and your organization?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Dowdy. I work with the Toronto Police Services Board as a senior advisor, but probably more importantly for this conversation, I'm a parent and community advocate, very much interested in helping communities and individuals access justice in a variety of spaces: law enforcement, education, politics, you name it. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We appreciate you being here and sharing with us today. So we'll get started with our questions. And as Anthony's able to join, we'll definitely bring him into the conversation as well. My first question is in terms of law enforcement and the criminalization in the Black community. What sort of serious challenges and opportunities do you see will help to advance the racial justice and equity for this community? And we'll start with you, Giannis.
Yeah, I think if you look across Canada, there's been a particular focus in the last few years in terms of engaging police services and Black communities around the acquisition and storage of weapons, which has been a significant focus on municipalities across Canada. However, for us, I think it's a significant distraction from the work that actually needs to happen. Our communities are not violent because of guns. Our communities are not violent because of one-off opportunities. Our communities are violent because we have inadequate access to housing, poor quality of living conditions, inadequate access to transportation, food security. The opportunities that exist over the next few years are hopefully increased leadership from the federal, provincial, municipal governments across Canada. If you look at the federal government level, they just introduced a new justice strategy. We'll see what the outcomes of that actually look like in terms of monetary value and public policy changes. I know the folks in the province are working on a few changes as well. Some concerning, as they tend to be with the province of Ontario, but I'm optimistic that, you know, with the sector's leadership, we'll be able to mobilize some significant changes over the next few years.
Appreciate that. That's great. Thank you. And Danielle, how do you feel on the same topic?
So my work, I've been a law enforcement professional, not a police officer, but on the civilian side. My work is always focused around communities and how do we engage communities as law enforcement to better understand, you know, where we can do better, you know, what are the needs and the requirements for justice for, you know, Black and other racialized communities. What I see as the opportunity, it's really on both sides. So as someone who serves as a bridge, oftentimes, I would like to see our community more engaged on a sustainable level. So, you know, protests are very important because they always highlight issues, but then once a protest is done, like what's the work after that? How are we engaging around the table, you know, with policymakers and decision makers and senior leadership, right? So it's key to making sure that the changes that have been, you know, demanded, that folks are around the table to help shape those decisions. Because I mean, I'm an individual. I try my heart out in my professional capacity all the time in terms of pushing the system and pushing, you know, the various systems and leaders. But without that community backing, it's incredibly tough work. And I recognize that it's a lot of onus to put on the community, and people are tired, and I see it every day, you know, in trying to engage and bring folks in, and people will tell you, like, I don't have the bandwidth, I'm fighting on so many, sometimes people are just fighting for themselves and like for their own survival, but a lot of people who are engaged in different areas, they're also just really tired because they're doing all of the system work and there aren't enough hands to go around, and there's not enough collective energy to go around. So I mean, as they say, like, you know, justice is never, like, it's never given, like communities have to take it, and we all have to work together and take it, and that does require work on both ends.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much for your response. And I believe we have Anthony Morgan with us now. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself and your organization.
Sure. Hi, folks. My name is Anthony Morgan. I work at the City of Toronto as a senior strategic advisor, intersectional social justice. That's a fairly new role. Before that, I was the manager of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. I'm also a co-founder of the Sentencing and Parole Project. I'm a human rights lawyer by training, and I've dedicated my career to trying to address some of the systemic issues facing Black folks within the justice system, from racial profiling to over-incarceration to lack of reintegration services and supports. And so I share all those titles. I'm all of those things, but also just speaking in this forum just as myself. So definitely not representing the city in this conversation. And I can speak to the Sentencing and Parole Project, but it's more just taking this opportunity to draw from my experiences, my insights, and the things that I've learned in the course of this journey. It's also reminding me I was recently named as one of the members of the steering committee of the recently launched Canadian Black Justice Strategy that the federal government is initiating. So myself and a number of other lawyers and community legal advocates from across the country are involved in that project. So that's me.
Thank you so much for giving the introduction, and we do definitely appreciate everything you can add to the conversation, so much so that we're going to go back to the original question that we had, because we would love to get your perspective on that as well. So in case you weren't here, my first question for you, Anthony, is in terms of law enforcement and criminalization in the Black community, what are some of the serious challenges and opportunities that you see to advance racial justice and equity?
Some of the challenges, I think, the pervasiveness of the stereotype that continues to persist of Black violence and Black criminality, so that we have school systems that are not aggressively working to change the narrative, that we have media that's not working aggressively to change the narrative, that we don't have politicians, business leaders, and collective society actively engaging in an ongoing basis to fundamentally change the narrative around what it means to be a Black person, especially a Black young person, and not exclusively, but especially a young Black male. I think that's one of the persistent challenges because of the persistent prejudice, stereotypes, biases, and ideas and attitudes around Black people, their associations with violence. Again, there's all these pernicious negative things, and it infects the way folks think and what they think we deserve and what we are entitled to. I think in terms of the opportunities, conversations like this are a tremendous opportunity. There's a collective, I think, awakening that is happening within our communities where we are finding spaces like this one to engage in conversation and continue to push forward and continue to trouble those narratives in different ways, large and small, from getting involved with our children's school parents council to writing op-eds to being a part of different organizations. There are different kind of social mobilizations that are happening, and I think that's what, once that is deepened and there's a more of a groundswell, and we create sort of that critical mass of Black folks actively engaging to resist those narratives. I think with that happening, that's when we'll really see a fundamental shift in how the criminal justice system responds to us.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And Danielle, how do you feel on the same topic? On the social justice and ways that we can move it forward, or for you in your lived experience in the justice sector, what do you think are some of the best practices that are essential? Sorry.
On my experience with the Peel District School Board. So I'm a very active parent in my kids' school, in their education, in, you know, nieces and nephews and what have you, but also just there's a parent advisory group called We Rise Together, and it's specifically looking at Black student success. We as parents, a group of us, you know, came together a few years ago and have been pushing and mobilizing the board to do better for Black students. Like stats continually show that, you know, our students are higher suspension rates, you know, higher push out rates, you know, streamed, well, they're addressing streaming now, but, you know, streamed into applied programs and all of these kind of factors that tie together that undermine a solid education for them, and the education that they're actually entitled to by right. And so, you know, we did so much organizing at every level. So like within the schools, at the school board, with the school administrators, and then we took that fight to the Ministry of Education. Many of you have probably heard that Peel District School Board was put under ministry review. So what happened was that, you know, we got, we pushed for the government to actually step in and do a review specifically into anti-Black racism within the education space. And the report that they came back with was horrific. As horrific as we would all imagine, because we've seen all of the reports before. And you know, they gave the board a very tight timeline to kind of start to address the issues and put pieces in place to address, and they didn't. And the fall, and so we kept pressuring the government. So we didn't take our foot off the gas, which is what happens sometimes, completely understandably, because the work is exhausting, right? And so, you know, we kept up that pressure to say, you've done this review, but it's just a report. It hasn't gone anywhere. And the minister, I know Minister Lecce has, you know, a lot of detractors, what have you, but on this file, I will say that he did deliver. And so what you had is they sent in another person to do a follow-up review, Arlene Huggins, and when it was seen that the report wasn't being taken seriously, they put the board and the trustees under suspension. So what that means is that all of their powers were stripped away, and the ministry took over the administration of the school board in order to be able to enact the elements that are within the review. So this is a board being put under suspension for anti-Black racism has never happened in this country. Boards under suspension usually happen because there's some criminal activity, there's fraud, there's all kinds of you know, actual legal what have you. But in this case, it was anti-Black racism was seen as, and as it should always be seen as, so insidious that the fact that the board did not take it seriously and the impacts on the students and decided to suspend the board, and then with that suspension fired the director of education. All of this was completely unprecedented and unheard of. And that was really through parents, you know, advocating and mobilizing. And this is why I say, you know, I often say that policing and education are kind of, you know, twin sisters in the same family. And so I knew how to properly kind of engage within the system because it's work that I do, you know, in my day job. But I mean, it translates right across, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education. Like there's a lot of these colonial structures that we know are rooted in anti-Blackness that we have to, it's easy to figure out how to, you know, where the barriers are, where the resistance is, and then how to develop a strategy. And so for me, best practice, again, is always around when communities mobilize and stay mobilized, because it is hard to keep your foot on the gas. I will say, and I don't want to take up too much time, but you know, in all of the fight, we did lose a parent. We had a parent who, you know, dropped dead from a brain hemorrhage, like an aneurysm, while in the middle of sending a letter to the school board. You know, the work is painful. It's a lot. It takes a lot. We know that racism is like corrosive on our health. It's not something that we take lightly, and we actually lost a parent within the fight. That's Kola Iliomade, for those of you who knew him. And so it's I recognize when people say that they're tired. I do appreciate what that means, because I do know that it actually could be deadly. But then how do we, you know, bring in more people so that many hands do make light work in fighting for social justice?
Thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate, obviously, the tiring work that you do and your team is doing, and also that you saw that it was being finally taken somewhat seriously, and it was seen as the criminalization that it is. So we really appreciate your thought-provoking thoughts there. We want to hear from you, Giannis, if you'd like to add to the same based on the same question. What best practices do you feel are essential for racial equity in Canada?
I think it's 2023. You know, since the year of the gun, we've been putting out best practices, good ideas, good recommendations, and yet we haven't made significant changes. I think you will not solve. I think there's a lot of excitement over the last 3 years with the initiatives that have been launched, but you will not solve 400 years of exploitation, extraction with incremental changes, a few $100 million here and there, and inadequate public policy changes from the feds, province, and municipalities. My biggest concern in terms of acting on these good policies and recommendations is, Canada is a country that does not move until they have either significant public pressure, the requisite data and analysis that has been produced by pseudo-intellectual academics, or funding that has been put up by the third private party or the philanthropic sector. We haven't seen any of that. For me, who, in my role in justice within the philanthropic sector, as my brother Liban, I think, is in here, and his organization, Foundation for Black Communities, has so adequately demonstrated, majority of philanthropic giving in this country does not go to us. I believe it was 0.7%. That is an accumulation of decades of, inadequate giving to Black charities and Black communities and Black organizations. We cannot be expected, and like, Danielle and I think Anthony was saying earlier, the burden that we put on leaders in the sector is ridiculous. I often talk to young people in frontline organizations and communities, and it's ridiculous that they feel they have the burden to save their communities. And that is because of inadequate funding, inadequate action on the policy recommendations or suggestions that Black communities have been making for nearly 20, 30 years now. And the hyper-sensationalization of, certain initiatives when they get launched as a mechanism of a savior for our communities. We lack generational thinking, right? Same way that the Americans looked at the moon and said, we're going to go there in 10 years. We don't have those same conversations and approaches when it comes to our communities or development. My friend Karim is in here as well, and he can tell you about the work that his community, the Aga Khan community does, the Somali community does in Toronto. The fact that they've gotten several $100 million on housing projects from provinces and federal government. Where is our generational thinking when it comes to these initiatives? Organizations like Foundation for Black Communities, Black North Initiative, NAPSI, they exist now to do that work behind the scenes for us and to push those conversations when we lack the necessary expertise or ability. So I'm confident, but we've been here before. Yes, of course. My brother, Dr. Jones, where is he? I think I saw him too. And if he's not a doctor, we're going to get him his PhD soon. Thank you.
Appreciate that so much. We love your remarks. Thank you. And Anthony, the same question for you. What do you think are the best practices that are really essential for racial equity in Canada?
Yeah, it's very tough to add. There's been so much wisdom shared by Danielle, Jonas, and I'm sure other folks, and definitely from what I'm seeing, who else is in the room, there many of the ideas have been articulated. It's execution, and also us being located in positions of power to actually lead the execution, because overwhelmingly there's the recommendations or the identification of the points of intervention for change. But then if you look at the policy people, if you look at the people who are actually the ones responsible for stewarding this work forward, it's overwhelmingly not us. The ultimate responsibility ends up falling on people who are not from Black communities, or if there might be one or two Black people, but at the end of the day, there's no, again, critical mass of us. And so that's not a call for Black faces in high places. It's more of a call for us to be strategic and not for us to trust other folks to execute on the interests of Black people. We have to find ourselves in these spaces, wherever that is, within, again, education, employment, housing, healthcare, policing and justice. We have to make sure that we are strategically moving as a community and calling for and insisting that our folks are the ones leading files at the level of public policy. And I think I'm just offering this as not the ultimate solve, but to add on to all the great wisdom that's already been shared. So this is saying ditto for everything else everybody else has said, and then perhaps also just making sure that we are the ones who are carrying the work forward and not in a kind of precarious, you have a 2-year contract to solve Black issue, you have a 3-year contract, 4 or 5-year, no, generational, as has been articulated, so that we actually have a shot at undoing these centuries old legacies of anti-Black racism that are embedded in our systems.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate your response as an extension to everything else that was already said. And building on what we've already discussed, as it relates to structural racism, anti-Black racism, and systemic discrimination in Canada, what best practices, tools, or framework models do you feel are genuinely advancing Black-led not-for-profits and charities that are, in the justice and ecosystem here in Canada? This question is for you, Giannis.
Absolutely. For us, we're big proponents of trust-based philanthropy, which means in the granting scheme, it means, multi-year agreements, reduce barriers on the application process, reporting process, and then going beyond the check for your grantees. So as a grant-making organization, we do all of that. I often don't ask our organizations that we partner with to submit applications. It's more of a conversation. I put the onus on the due diligence of us as a funder. And these are the same practices that the Canadian philanthropic community can take to strengthen Black charities and Black-led organizations. The problem is when you put ridiculous burdens on those organizations and limit their ability to actually serve their communities by forcing them to go from project to project instead of making mission-based investments, you're setting up those organizations and those communities for failure, and you're only playing to your own vanity, is what we tell philanthropy. But at the same time, you need to make those necessary public policy changes at the government level, because institutions and philanthropy, institutions, whether it's in philanthropy, economic development, political engagement for Black communities, come and go. Leaderships come and go. Practices that are set in legislative change state. And we've been trying to engage the federal government to pressure the Canadian philanthropic community that has over $120 billion of assets to do a better job. That means ensuring that foundations whose endowments have billions of dollars in assets use those assets to invest in our communities, whether it's Black affordable housing, cooperative daycares across our communities, grocery stores that are Indigenous and Black-led. Philanthropy has a mechanism to do it, but they do not based off of ability, it's the lack of courage. So for a lot of the stuff that we try to do, we try to engage government, the philanthropic community and corporate sector to put in those best practices built around trust and equity for the community organizations that are doing this frontline work across Toronto.
Thank you for that. Really appreciate your response. There's people giving you your roses in the chat box as well. So everyone should take time to read the comments there. Anthony, you spoke a little bit about intergenerational collaboration. What do you feel like that looks like or should look like?
Yeah, I think there's room for us to enhance. I know there's important work that's already being done to ensure that we have deeper conversations with our elders. But I think we could strengthen that work to understand some of the ways in which these systems have truly undermined the ability of Black communities to gain a foothold within the society. While many of us, the folks who I'm gathering quickly from our cohort, we've been able to access education and opportunities in ways in which our parents or grandparents couldn't even fathom within the society, but there's still a tremendous amount of wisdom and understanding that they have about navigating this space that I think we should be tapping into and be building sort of intergenerational and an immediate way of moving forward. So young people engaging with the elders and having elder circles, and all of us having elders that we can rely on for wisdom to go to help check us and keep us grounded and give us perspective, and also help us to see that, hey, in 1970 and then in 1990 and then in 1995, this very same thing happened, and here's where it went. We don't have a lot of that wisdom. We don't have enough of it. Some of us do, some of us don't. It's not collectively held. And so that's what I'm talking about there. But also beyond just how we build things, we should be thinking about creating whole institutions of education, institutions of healthcare, institutions of research and policy making and justice making. And there's so many ways in which there's no strong community that you can look to that does not have its own institutions, whether that be spaces of faith, spaces of community gathering that are owned and controlled by Black people. And so those are the kinds of generational shifts that we need. And I think the framework that we should be using, and I think many of us are, but we don't always call it that, is reparative justice. When we talk about reparative justice, the way I invoke it is thinking about the fact that we are looking actively at legacies of 400 years of enslavement of Black people, followed by segregation and outright anti-Black racist exclusion from opportunities. And so, for us to be able to engage in a fair and equitable way, we have to move forward with a reparative justice framework. So this is not just about addressing the things that are happening now, but it's about accounting for those hundreds of years of being withheld from opportunities, resources denied us and our children and our families to be able to build the institutions that other communities simply take for granted.
Wow, really appreciate that response. Thank you so much for sharing. Danielle, what does intergenerational collaboration look like to you?
I love this question. I had the honor of working with Dudley Laws when he was still with us. You know, some of the work that I did as a 20-something-year-old with the Coalition of African Canadian Organizations, which was kind of a multi-group, multi-organization lobbying group, and just being able to, I mean, I think the issue kind of with young people or people who are new to the space is that everything feels so brand new. And so we have these great ideas of like, we're going to do this and we're going to, you know, go this way and that way. And it was so beneficial to have Dudley in the room to say, yeah, we did that didn't work. And here's why, or we've already tried that. Here's where it broke down. And being able to think through and learn from him as an elder and other elders that were in that space. I, as a young person, there was probably 2 or 3 other young people in there. That room, like there should have been more of us to be able to learn from that wisdom. And so you see, you know, the same kind of initiatives and the same kind of reaction and resistance to these initiatives because we're not spending the time to really build and learn in the ways that we should. And you know, the interesting part in all of this is, well, it's probably not interesting, but like, you know, white supremacy, like it's an unoriginal playbook, right? So we've seen the tactics, we've seen how our communities can be, you know, thwarted with sometimes very minimal effort, and we should be able to forecast some of these things. And a lot of times that we do, but we just don't have, again, that collective to be able to push back. So like intergenerational collaboration is key. You know, I mentor a lot of young folks. I should probably be mentoring more because there's so much knowledge to be able to share and to be able to say, look, here's what works. Here's this, and I think the beauty of our generation, kind of this, you know, Gen Z / millennial cusp, is that we have kind of grown up in this system, so we know differently than our parents did, who were fighting outside of the system, or our elders who were outside of the system and fighting. But now we're in these spaces, so we have a different kind of language and understanding of, you know, where are all the levers, you know, where are the push points, who are the contacts, how do you navigate these spaces, and how do you work kind of collaboratively across communities, so like within our community, but like, you know, intergenerationally in different spaces to kind of pull everything together. I think that's it's key. Like I always say, like, I love a good protest, but I'm not a protester. I'm just not that person that's going to be on the road. But I absolutely appreciate the folks that do that work. And then how do I, as a systems person, leverage that work and bring it into the system and into the space and translate it in a way that, you know, in the past folks might say, oh, they're just protesters and it'll go away, you know, and how protesters get dismissed, and how, you know, that kind of loud activism gets dismissed by systems and systems folks. You know, how does a person like me then take that and translate it into policy. And that's my work in my day job, and in the work I do with the school board. It's okay, you've heard this. Now we're not going to forget that was said. We're going to capture it somewhere, and then we're going to use your language to translate this into meaningful policy that actually addresses the heart of what was being said. So I don't see how we do this without each other. Like, everyone has a role to play. There are so many different parts. Every part is key. There's no one position that is better than the other, that is more important than the other. They are all equally important.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And we're just going to shift gears a little bit. This question is for all of you. In terms of some of the national initiatives to mitigate these issues, how can we balance both, protest and policy? And we'll start with you, Brother Giannis. I know that you pulled up a track at City Hall. Can you share that narrative with us a little bit?
Yeah, perfect question for me, I guess. Yeah, I think that balance is needed. We rented an 18-wheeler truck. I'm more of a troll protester, not a big group protesting. I like to make so we got an 18-wheeler truck and we put Canadian Philanthropy at that time was hoarding $85 billion, and we parked it outside of City Hall the same day that our friends at PFC were all meeting for their annual summit to demonstrate the fact that it was extremely stupid to be hoarding this amount of money during a pandemic, during a racial awakening, during during a moment of where we had significant white consciousness, I would like to say, in Canada. It was very frustrating for me to be seeing a lot of leaders and sector mobilizers on a national scale refer to our communities as B3 or this, or new terminologies or new BIPOCs or this. It was very frustrating. And the real question that was coming to everybody's, head was, where's the money? Like I don't care that you read an anti-racism book. I don't care that you have feelings about this. I want to know where the money is, right? We need money in our communities. So that was the idea of the truck. Did it work? I think it did work. There was changes to the disbursement quota across Canada, which forced foundations to increase the amount they give away every year from 3.5% to 5%. We were calling for 10%. But even that slight change has resulted in over $900 million for charities across Canada this year. So when you couple protesting with, significant public policy changes that is rooted in, logic and common sense approach, people will listen. And it doesn't help that, we went on Instagram with, Noah Fortescue, who was a co-founder of our organization and the co-founder of OVO, on his Instagram to over 600,000 followers around the world to demonstrate that Canadians, that it's not all right up here. I think that did help. But for us, just touching back on the question earlier, in terms of intergenerational connection, I'm a byproduct of elders like Dr. Sheldon Taylor, Charles Roach. I am a byproduct of Somali women who raised me in my neighborhood, in my community. This conversation about knowledge exchange or knowledge transfer, I think, is really important. And our brother, Isaac and Dream Legacy are leading that Black knowledge exchange on a federal level, and I think that could be a mechanism to support that intergenerational connection. And then just lastly, on the future of this type of work in terms of protests and public policy changes, I think, like everyone was talking about, I think people get excited with protests, right? It's something that everyone can do. It's something that you can put on social media. For those who like virtue signaling, they can fit right in. But if it's not backed in public policy changes, if it's not backed in increased financial resources, if it's not backed in changes to bylaws and governance structures, then to me it's just feelings, and feelings don't serve us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Anthony, how do we balance the protesting and the policy building at the same time?
Yeah, I just think it's absolutely necessary. I think about the work that we're able to do in the city of Toronto with the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit, and that comes very directly, clearly out of the protests of Black Lives Matter Toronto occupying the space in front of Toronto Police Headquarters for 2 weeks. That turned into a moment that folks who are already on the inside, who's my current executive director, Denise Andrea Campbell, saw that this was an opportunity to fundamentally advance structures, policies, initiatives for the betterment of Black people. And so that moment was taken. So they have to be seen as a continuum. I think that one of the most effective tools of white supremacy has been to confuse even us, where there's sometimes this hostility that has been generated within us to see the protesters as being disruptive and inconvenient and difficult, and then vice versa. They see us as sellouts, folks holding the bag of these institutions. I think that is very much what white supremacy wants, because the moment that we really truly understand that that protest is actually how we got this policy, then I think these systems would fall a lot quicker. But white supremacy doesn't want us to really fully awaken and realize that. But all the work that when I was leading the Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit, and Ania Ayodele Grant as the founding manager was leading before, we always knew and we always named that this is not an alternative to protest. This is the continuity. This is the fruits of that work, and so that always needs to be honored. And then I think it is also circular, right? When we run into policy challenges and gaps and opposition, then it's time to go outside of these systems again and push and create the climate, and then run through. So they have to be mutually reinforcing. We have to see them as part of a continuum, an ecosystem that is actually mutually reinforcing and not at opposition. But again, I think one of all of us have experienced this from people that we care about, folks who we believe are doing good work in community, will take shots at us for different positions that we've taken, whether in government or from their perspective too close to government. And admittedly, we've also, if we're really being honest with ourselves, there are times where, yeah, there have been protests or approaches and things that have been said or done. We're like, oh, I don't know what they're doing. This is confusing. Now, I don't think we should not exercise a level of critical understanding, and we can still have disagreements about things, but ultimately I think there's a way of handling those disagreements that are not for public consumption, right? There are ways that we can resolve and say, okay, I don't know if I fully understood this position, but here's what we can still build from this, right? From the protest to the policymaker, and the policymaker or the policy folks who are, I guess, more positioned within policy and structures and institutions, to have that continuous conversation. I think we truly outflank these systems of white supremacy when we build those relationships in ways that aren't obvious and are not for again, not for the consumption of others, folks outside of our community, so that we know what's happening. And while these other folks are not, they think that we're in opposition, but we're actually moving within the same direction.
Wow, thank you so much. And Danielle, how do you feel that we can balance protest and policy?
Sarah is muted there. I mean, Anthony stated it so perfectly. It's not, to me, it's not, as I was saying before, it's all the work is important. So it's not really a balance. It's, like Anthony said, it's a continuation of the work. But it's key because, what tends to happen in system spaces is that, it's easy to dismiss one person, as being a troublemaker or a loudmouth or kind of on the fringe. And, you'll hear folks say that, well, you feel that way, but I haven't heard that from the community. And obviously, because they're not in those spaces. And so protest is important because that's when they do hear from community. But then it's, like I said earlier, then it kind of falls apart if that loud voice isn't sustained. And really and truly, it can't be sustained, right? Like somebody can't be in that protest space all the time. Because then it's easy to also tune that out as just like a fringe element. And so the balance is, getting more folks within systems and not just Black folks, but Black folks who understand these issues, who are community oriented, minded and grounded in community, to be able to push forward the elements that are being raised or the issues that are being raised, and being able to work that through. Because sometimes, and the reality is sometimes we do have our folks in these spaces and they do not help advance issues that have been raised in the community for a whole host of reasons, right? Everyone is on different spectrums of activism, and some aren't even on the spectrum at all. And some folks might feel like it's not necessary, we're doing enough, they're good with how the system approaches, all kinds of things. And so, I'm long past the days where I just celebrate, a Black person being in a really important space until I find out, how are they in that space? What is their mindset? What is their track record? Have they spoken out in the past? Are they known for advocacy? And if they're not, then it's like, okay, I mean, we can celebrate that there's some Black access, and within that within that realm, they're building their family, and that's also important in terms of like Black capacity building. But in terms of community capacity building, not always helpful. So policy and protest have to go together. And again, I just encourage folks to continue to work together. Like Setsi is a great example of that. And, the leadership from Victor is just amazing, and just pulling people together and doing that sustained conversation with government and still connecting with communities and making sure that that voice is there, so that, like I said, folks like me in my professional space can say, well, this is what I'm hearing in community. And, reports come out and we say, well, look at this report, and this is what this says, and this is how we can build off, if there's recommendations there, this is how we can incorporate it into our work. And so it's also making sure that, policy, the policy makers, as Anthony said, is often policymakers don't look like us. In my field, in law enforcement, within, oversight and governance, I've not met another Black person in this space, in this country. Like I haven't. If they exist, I would love to meet them. I haven't met them yet. And so, like me, lone Black woman, doing policy development for the largest municipal police board in Canada, but it's a very lonely space, and pushing, how do we address anti-Black racism without being able to draw on other, I have to draw on other industries, which is fine, but then it's hard because it makes, having to be a pioneer all that much tougher. Pioneering in the space, I mean, on different issues and initiatives. And so again, that's where the protest piece and the activism piece really helps to be able to say, okay, we're just going to be a leader in this space because this is what communities have said. This is how we have to respond. This is why it's key. Systems are, they're here for the people, and not just some people. All of the people. And if systems are having an adverse impact on, on Black communities, on racialized and Indigenous communities, then we have the responsibility to address how those systems are impacting folks. So I see it as all part of one piece of work. There's no, to me, it's not a balance. It's like, it's all part of the work. We're all in here, and we all got to get in here to move the needle.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing on that. I really appreciate your response. And this question also is for all of you. A lot of our leaders nationally and internationally have raised awareness around rest being a form of resistance. So as a leader, how essential do you feel self-care is to your well-being and the work that you do? And we'll start with you, Giannis.
I think I'm notorious in the sector for having a lot of self-care. I tend to disappear. Several people on this call will know it very well. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. I go on my silent retreats. I like to be left alone for a bit, especially because we talk a lot. So I'm a big proponent of self-care. But unfortunately, I recognize that I have the privilege of taking that. A lot of Black leaders don't. You're often working 7 days a week. You're on call 24 hours a day. And because of the way that our communities have been built, you're always jumping from crisis to crisis to crisis. I think it's extremely important for whether it's government or corporate sector, or even more importantly, philanthropy, which is solely exists to take risk and transform societies, to put in mechanisms for extended leaves, sabbaticals, leadership retreats, professional development for our community. Because what happens to Black leaders when they burn out, they leave the sector, and that them leaving the sector results in a significant gap of knowledge, expertise, and also drive to get the work done. So I'm a big proponent of self-care.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for sharing. We agree as well. And Anthony, how do you feel on the same, the importance of self-care and well-being in your work?
Yeah, I think it's critically important. I don't think any of us will say that it's not absolutely essential. It's just as Jonas noted, the structures are so punishingly, I don't know, resistant to us finding time and space to be able to truly get it. But I think we should still find ways, all of us, to be able to take care of ourselves and take care of our families and get that rest, get that respite, so that we can be fresh, so that we can think clearly, and that we're not, so we're not, so we can ensure that we are truly drawing uh, from cups that are full, or actually, or just not totally drained. But a lot of us, I know, are gassed and are having trouble keeping up with multiple things. I know I'm notorious for the same. Many people send me emails like, "Oh, you didn't respond to, or you didn't do this," like trying to keep up with everything. You try to go, and then eventually, in different ways, we flatline, we burn out, or just ghost certain initiatives or opportunities. But it shouldn't be this unsustainable. So I think there are ways, if we were to have more, I think, collective support, and really understand and appreciate that there should be folks who are doing the work, and then like build in, as was mentioned, sabbaticals, rest, knowing that someone's going to retreat. The idea is that other folks need to come forward. They do the work. They hold the space for a while. They retreat. They rejuvenate. If you look at any systems that grow and thrive, and even perhaps it's a jarring example, but that's how frontline wars are fought. You have folks who are on the front line, or even policing initiatives. You see how Ottawa was cleared. You had folks who were at the front for a while. They held this pace, and then they knew there was going to be a retreat, and a whole bunch of other folks stand there. Now, I'm not saying that to extol those systems. I'm just saying, for structures to work, for us to be able to thrive and sustain in this space, knowing that we are warring against systems of white supremacy that don't want to see us thrive, we do have to build that in, even when it's difficult. And I'm guilty, is probably more guilty than most, and not taking those steps to get that rest.
I appreciate your honest response. And Danielle, how do you feel on this topic?
I feel very, very passionately about this topic. I think, over the years, I was not always so good at it. But as I had mentioned earlier, when we lost our parent in the fight, I think that really was an important wake-up call for all of us to prioritize rest, to be attuned to our bodies. When we do fight, I was having a conversation with a friend this week, and I was saying that, yeah, I had to deal with something at work that was directly dealing with anti-Black racism. And afterwards, I went to take a nap because I was very much attuned to the fact that that was draining, and my body needs to rest and recuperate from that, and giving myself permission to say, like, that wasn't good. Here's the health impact on me physically and physiologically, and my body now needs to rest, instead of pushing through, because that's what we tend to do. We just push through. So, I've got a girlfriend, and she calls it radical self-care. So it's not even just self-care, radical self-care is what we're into, because it has to be so deliberate, so intentional, and so you have to make the time in the space. And so I will say, in the last year, I have been very much focused on being in that space where I can recognize where I need to rest, and giving myself permission to take that rest, and not just permission within myself, but even within my workspace. So, Black Mental Health Week started off as Black Mental Health Day. As soon as it started, I was like, I'm in. I send an email to my whole team to say, I'm taking the day off, and it's not just a day off, it's a day off for Black Mental Health Day. And I'm taking it because this work is actually exhausting me, and I need a minute to sit down, reflect on everything that I've been through in this space. And I need you guys to understand that I'm taking this time off specifically to reflect on the levels of anti-Blackness in this space and what it does to me. This week, this year it's a week long, so I don't have the week, but I did take the Thursday and the Friday, and the Thursday and the Friday are going to be spent at the spa, connecting with friends. You know, I know the saying is it takes a village to raise a child. I always just say it takes a village, period. We all need our own village. I have my village of sisters and of friends and that support me and that that I support, and that village is so necessary as part of the self-care, because sometimes we do need those spaces to just, those safe spaces to be able to, you know, relax, let our hair down, say what we need to say, and you know that it's without judgment, and that you're able to, you know, rest and recuperate. So I absolutely am a fan of not just self-care, but radical, intentional self-care. It's actually necessary for the work, because otherwise we've seen the flip side of what happens when you don't.
Absolutely, really appreciate that. And to close, we're going to ask for whatever your closing thoughts are and whatever call to action you feel is necessary for the Black community. We'll start with you, Anthony.
And I was hoping to glean from the wisdom of the other folks have time to think. Does come to me, trusting that this is the right thing to share. But I think what is coming to me is having compassion in this work is incredibly important. None of us is going to get it right 100% of the time, but I think we have to find ways to support each other, to recognize we are in this collective struggle. And so that means finding ways to see each other's strengths and weaknesses, and being able to share and build together with those, knowing that those imperfections exist, but also being confident in knowing that we are pushing towards the same thing, even if there are different parts of that vision that are different or conflict. There's ways in which we can support each other to realize higher forms of community justice, of reparative justice for ourselves, for our communities, for our families. And so I think let us never forget, I think, so part of that compassion means seeing each other's humanity in that, because if you see articles, I see Lee Man, I see Jonas, I see Danielle, these people are on TV, they're on panels, they're doing these different things. And I think at different times it can create this, it can make people forget that we are humans also doing this work. And so when other folks frankly are criticized or attacked or just moving in ways that invite a certain kind of attention, we don't always appreciate that these folks are complete humans, and they need to be supported as such. We need to be supported as such. And so I think that needs to run through the ethic with which we take this struggle, we take this work, and we take this movement. That's what I would offer.
Thank you so much. Giannis, your closing thoughts and call to action for the Black community.
My closing thoughts. You know, I think regardless of what sector you're in, housing, social justice, community development, criminal justice, you know, transit, food security, I think it's important for all of us to be mindful that we need to be creating pathways to economic mobility, whether it's political, social, or economic mobility for our communities, and that we should not be satisfied with incrementalism, virtue signaling, or endless discussions that don't result in systemic transformational change. I'm optimistic with leaders like Dahabo at Black North, Liban and Gladys at Foundation for Black Communities, Victor and Setsi, my brother Anthony, who's way smarter than me. You know, I'm confident that these leaders are able to transform our society. So let us give them the space they need. Let us equip them with a record, and our brother Craig, of course, at Black Opportunity Fund. Let us not let us support these leaders. Let us create pathways for them. Let us amplify their work, and let us be as together, because as someone said earlier in the chat, you know, when we are divided, it is easier for us to be conquered, and we are together, it's easier for us to actually make some significant change. So thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. And Danielle, what are your closing thoughts and your call to action for the Black community?
My closing thoughts, I mean, I really appreciate this space. My call to action is just around creating more, you know, avenues and venues like this. You know, I've worked with many people on the call, and some I haven't. Jonas, it's great to meet you. We've never worked together, but you can guarantee that I'll be reaching out and we can see how we can work together. You know, there's so much that can be done as a collective. And, you know, just to reiterate what I said earlier, you know, everyone has a part to play. And there's so many, you know, the depth and the diversity within our communities. If we were to be able to just, you know, leverage and build together in different spaces and use, you know, the expertise that's within our collective, to be able to push forward in different areas, it would be great. So my, you know, my only call to action is, you know, everyone stay the course, you know, stay in it, show up where you can. I know it's exhausting work. I know it's exhausting work, but, you know, if you can, write a letter, you know, show up to a meeting, you know, reach out to your local politician, reach out to your local, you know, whatever your interest is. Trust me, there's a body, a government, a politician, a something attached. Reach out and engage those folks. There's always Black people in those spaces that are trying to do better within those spaces. So there's work that can be done in any area where you feel passionate about, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's, you know, philanthropy, whether it's education, healthcare, you know, the arts. Like the work has to be done everywhere, so everyone can play a part.
Absolutely. Very well said. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to take the time to thank our panelists for being here. This was really valuable for the entire hour from beginning to end. So we want to thank you for your time, and we want to thank you for the work that you do and your diligence and everything. Thank you for all of that. And we also want to end the session the same way that we started, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also want to acknowledge our ancestors and those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stewards whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be here, and have a great weekend.